Christoph is responsible for venture development and sales at Project A. I'm responsible for marketing. And we've been working with, I think, over the 5 years, each of us maybe 20 portfolio companies. So we've seen what we're talking about. We know that marketing and sales alignment is a topic out there. And today we want to put bullshit aside and give you some insights on how you can work to improve the alignment. But as we know that you're all tired after lunch now, just some interactive start. Who here is actually working in sales? Hands raised, please. Okay, 20%. Who's a marketeer? Who's something with growth? All right, lots of people. General management? Okay, and BI or data? Oh, very few people. All right. Why here? So who thinks that their marketing and sales could be better aligned? Probably. Wow. Who's actively working on it and tackled this because it is an issue? And who's just here because this is the most interesting sounding talk and the rest is boring? Thanks for being honest. All right, so let's give it a go. What's the core problem? I think we agree on that because I've seen a lot of hands raised now. The core problem is that when marketing and sales are not aligned, usually this affects growth in a negative way and usually costs go through the roof. When you Google for this, you find lots of studies that basically prove this. We picked two that align very much with what we experienced. So this one done by HubSpot says that around 50% of sales time is wasted because leads are badly qualified. I think most of us can relate to that if we're from the sales side. The second one saying roughly 10% of revenue every year is being lost because of bad alignment between marketing and sales. So it is a big issue and it has business impact. Some examples of what this actually means. So most of us, I think, can relate to this from a customer perspective. We've all seen these customer journeys ourselves where you see that obviously marketing and sales in a company were not aligned because you just receive confusing messaging. You have something being claimed in an ad and then you talk to sales and they say something different. So it's just confusing for the consumer. Or you see that sales is not utilizing the content that is clearly there on the marketing side. Oftentimes there are very good white papers, things explaining your product, but sales might just not be aware of them. And then worst case, they also start creating their own content, which is really not the thing that they should be focusing on, right? Or sales reps prospecting on their own. If sales think, well, the leads are really bad, then we go out and find our own leads. I mean, that's also not what they should focus on. And it also clearly shows that marketing apparently is not doing a really good job here in understanding what sales need. A fourth example is lost leads. I think we all have experienced that, right? So leads get lost somewhere in the handover between HubSpot and sales, for example. Or people just don't remember where the leads went. Or you have duplicates, and then people are being reached out to twice, which relates to the first problem. And then the conversion rate from MQL to SQL, so that's where the handover from marketing to sales usually happens. And here oftentimes sales are just lost or leads are just lost because marketing didn't really understand what it is exactly that sales need, right? So how qualified does the lead have to be? Do we need a phone number? What is it that we need to check with the lead before we hand it over? This usually also results in longer sales cycles because then sales has to take over the work and it goes back and forth in order to qualify the lead and to make sure, is this person really interested in what we're offering or how did the lead even get to us because apparently it wasn't properly qualified. And then sales oftentimes does more convincing than consulting. And then you shove the product down the people's throat and then this results in most likely them churning very soon. So there are lots of problems when marketing and sales are not properly aligned, and these are just a few of them. And now Christoph I will hand over to Christoph to see what can we do about all of this.
So when you start looking around for solutions, what you find mostly are a lot of buzzwords. For instance, HubSpot just killed their very own funnel. So they actually said, we don't do a funnel anymore, now we do a flywheel. And I'm not really sure how changing the shape of your acquisition funnel helps you in any way, but that's how HubSpot is selling acquisition now. Google has actually also come up with a very good idea. They invented the micro moments. Micro moments are apparently those instances where you suddenly decide, I now need a software as a service solution for my HR department. And then you basically have to build your whole acquisition around that. And it seems like Google is one of the few companies who actually has a good tracking solution for that. So maybe this is where the whole idea comes from. And what we have found is the whole strategic conceptual level when you talk about alignment doesn't really get you that far. So we believe it's really down to the small operational things, hundreds of things probably, that you need to do. And it's really just everyday sweat, tears, and sometimes even some blood. And this is basically what we want to do today. So I'm not going to cry, but we're going to show you how we approach that problem. And this is actually very granular. So we've basically come up with a matrix that is teams and funnel stages, and we've just basically thought about what can each team do at every step. And the important message here is probably at each step there's something to do for everybody. Don't worry, this will not be the basis of our presentation now, but we've actually reduced it a little bit to 4 points. And those 4 points we're going to go through in a bit more detail. It's goals, it's about nurturing, it's about what after sales can do for your acquisition function, and then also how data can enable that entire process. I will start with goals, goal setting, and especially how you can define the interface between marketing and sales. This is what Philipp has already touched upon a little bit. This is quite often where the whole friction basically leads to a lot of potential being lost. Let's start with the goal setting process. So the first message is quite simply, and it's probably not new to you, your acquisition team should have one shared common goal. So there should be basically one KPI that everybody feels accountable for. I mean, how do you come up with that? Usually you take your business case, you look at your yearly goal, break that down into monthly targets, and then you come up with a more graspable number. And this is obviously the first step that you need to do. But then you have something like a, let's say, revenue target or MRR target or whatever you're looking at, which is probably not enough for most companies because, I mean, yes, we all like to grow, but we also need to be efficient at some point because there's not an infinite volume of venture capital funding out there, unfortunately, at least for most companies. Maybe for some companies there is actually enough out there. So you should also give something like a efficiency threshold. That could be a payback time, that could just be a customer acquisition cost per lead that you can afford, something that basically gives you a threshold. And now that you've come up with this number and start talking to marketing and sales people, it kind of feels a little bit, rough and far away for them. So in order to make those people actually have a connection to that goal, you do need to break it down again. And this is kind of where the whole problem starts, right? Because now again, we said we want to align everything, we have one goal, and then you start breaking goals up and it gets tricky. So 2 things you need to do. First of all, it's quite common to give sales a revenue goal. Most companies actually don't give their marketing teams a revenue goal, but they give them something like a number of leads they need to generate. And we believe that this isn't really fair because, it's very hard to actually define a lead so closely that every lead is exactly the same. There's different kind of potential behind that lead. There's different kinds of qualification levels. And to really account for the contribution that marketing gives, you also have to give marketing a revenue quota. And this exercise actually also helps you with another step, and this is seeing how realistic is my business case actually. So when you do the whole bottom-up perspective, you sometimes realize, okay, this revenue goal means I have to do 200 demos a day. I have 2 salespeople. That might be tricky. When you've created some accountability, the next thing is visibility. And now again, this is something that everybody says when you set a goal, you have to make it visible. But we believe it's especially important in sales and marketing alignment because you have to make sure that those teams actually create a certain rhythm. And by rhythm, I basically mean the 2 parts aren't fully scalable. So when your sales team actually, let's say, they're missing their targets, maybe conversions are going down, you can't just double the number of leads and say, I'm still going to be fine and hit my revenue goal because you can't double the sales capacity that you have instantly. That's quite a big difference to, let's say, an e-commerce shop. When you have a revenue goal of 100K, your conversion drops by 50%. You can theoretically double your traffic and still hit your goal, but you cannot do this in marketing and sales. So you have to be really careful in constantly making even not just the overall goal, but also the moving parts visible to the entire team and connect and balance this. Classic funnel, I don't think I have to go through that. It's basically what HubSpot used to use before they killed this. What do you have to do now exactly for that handover. And usually the interesting point is kind of the marketing qualified lead, right? It's that point where marketing says, this lead is qualified enough for sales to talk to. It's usually 2 or 3 things that lead has in common with other leads in that stage. And this is, it's de-anonymized, so it's not just a click somewhere on your website. It does come from your target group, so it is a prospect, and you have some way of contacting your lead. Could be an email address, could be a phone number, and it's probably the common denominators that you have for marketing qualified leads. But this isn't really enough. I mean, this is a very rough description of what a marketing qualified lead is. So a lot of companies come up with more granular definitions of what that lead is. And a very common way is lead scoring. So how lead scoring works is basically that you come up with a certain activity that the lead does and allocate score points to that. So let's say I go to a website, I leave my email address, I get 10 points for that. Then I download a white paper, I get another 5 points. And then you say, I want a threshold, let's say 50 points, and if a lead reaches that threshold, I'm going to pass it over to sales. The problem with this is it's extremely hard to define that threshold in a way that it always works. For instance, I could now take, let's say, an intern. I'm working at a big company. I take an intern and I tell them, okay, please research on software as a service solutions, and let's use the HR example again. They go to Personio's website, download 10 white papers, get 5 points each, 50 points, off they go to sales. It's not a relevant lead. So what we like to use is a slightly more granular definition, and this is actually the buyer matrix. So what we have here is, first of all, the buyer decision journey that a person takes. So you start thinking about a problem, then you start looking for solutions, and then you're at a point where you think, okay, that's probably my solution, and now I have to select a vendor. On the other hand, something that also most lead scoring mechanisms don't really account for is the size of that lead. So it's completely different whether that person comes from an enterprise company or a very small business. And what you want to do in general is probably hand over leads earlier to sales, the bigger they are. So in this example, I would probably say an enterprise lead, when they hit your website and they start at least looking at a solution for the problem, it might make sense to talk to them already. For small-sized companies or mid-sized companies, maybe a little bit later, and the small ones, you really only want to talk when they're selecting their vendor and want to basically put their credit card down. Now, this might sound a little bit difficult to implement because now you have a lot of dimensions and complexity, and I don't necessarily think that's true, because for most companies, especially early-stage companies, I mean, to be honest, how many leads do you generate? Maybe 10, 20 a day? You can easily have someone sit down and go through this manually and making sure that the quality of leads that you hand over to sales is really good. And especially at the beginning, when you start your marketing activities, you want to make sure that sales believes in the quality of your leads. So I think it's time well invested. And when you start scaling, there's actually a lot of mechanisms as well, how you can enrich your data to get some initial information on how big that lead is. So it could be something in Germany. Schober is quite well known. You can basically buy information like number of employees, enrich your data with it, and segment them into those 3 categories. And if your marketing is set up well and actually track what this lead has been doing, you can also differentiate in whether that person downloaded a white paper, so I'd probably say they're still educating themselves, or whether that person tried to book a demo, probably further down that whole decision journey. And you can use those information points to set up automations in most CRMs that are out there and even scale that system. What else do you need to do with that handover? First of all, you have to make sure that the data that you hand over to sales isn't just the basic information, so not just a name and maybe a telephone number, but it's really important to give the whole context. So not just they downloaded a white paper, but which white paper? What was the actual pain point they were looking at? Did they read the white paper? Because this helps sales so much when they basically start the first conversation. And the third point is that marketing really should make sure to especially join sales in that very first touch point. So really going into the very first conversations, listening in and understanding what the issues are. So then there's sales on the other side. What do they have to do? Also 3 things. First one is lead response time. And there's a lot of studies out there, and I'm sure most of you actually heard this, conversions drop dramatically with time. So the quicker you talk to an inbound lead, the more likely you are to convert that into a client. And this is actually a KPI that I believe sales teams should commit to. So it should be up there on that visibility dashboard I was talking about. And it can be defined as a service level agreement. So saying something like, we want to make sure that 95% of leads are contacted in the first 30 minutes. Same goes true for how often do we actually try to reach those leads, right? Marketing spends a lot of effort into setting up the campaigns, creating content, and so on and so forth. You give them a ring, they don't pick up, I go to the next lead. And I generally think people don't try often enough. So there are a few numbers that you can use roughly on what is actually a good amount of follow-ups. I would say for small leads, it's probably around 5. For mid-sized companies, 8 or more times. In enterprise companies, actually up to 12 attempts have to be shown to be most profitable. And then a third point is actually about, I have to look it up. That was a wrong order, sorry. The lead routing. So quite often, also mentioned one of the problems, you generate a lead, and it's not entirely clear who that lead is actually routed to. So there are different ways to do this. You can say certain geographies are always routed to the same person, or you can also say there's just one person that is on lead duty. So any inbound lead that comes in normal working hours, it's contacted straight away by that person. And you have to make sure that the mechanisms in your CRM are fail-proof. So don't rely on them checking your CRM regularly. Make sure there's also push notifications. You can do integrations to Slack. You can automate emails, and so on and so forth.
All right. Second point, nurturing. So us from marketing, we believe that there's a lot we can do to help sales in B2B. And that basically is that no call that sales does has to be cold. There's so much we can do to lukewarm a lead before we call them. And the first thing I want to focus on is identifying who's on your website. Christoph mentioned it briefly. We borrowed this term from Björn Sud, who calls it de-anonymizing. So basically, you have traffic, but traffic is a very anonymous thing, right? And there are certain ways you can use to identify who this traffic actually is, who is behind this computer or smartphone. So the first thing, and I hope this is not new to most B2B marketers, is that you can use IP range lookups. So there are companies, I listed a few here, like Leadfeeder, SalesViewer, that we work with to understand who is it on our website. What those guys do is they identify the IP range that the traffic is coming from, and they do a lookup with a company that belongs to this IP address. So if we're selling to, I don't know, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and so on, we can see if those guys are on our website. And the best thing is that you can trigger that to your CMS, to your CRM, sorry. Basically, for example, if somebody visits your pricing site, they show an intent, right? So they're to some extent familiar with your product. They're maybe actively looking for such a solution. So if someone from, let's say, we identify them as being from Pepsi, they visit our pricing site. As Christoph said, enterprise client, we might want to call them right away. We can trigger this with these tools directly to, for example, HubSpot. So there's an opportunity being created right away for the sales guy as soon as somebody from Pepsi visits our pricing site. That's great, right? We de-anonymized the person on the website, and we immediately triggered an action for sales. And now when sales is calling, it's not a cold call anymore, because they know that this company at least, okay, Pepsi is a big one, but at least this company is currently looking for such a solution. There are other ways that I guess most of you are familiar with to de-anonymize traffic. When we send traffic to websites via marketing, then the traffic is still anonymous. But for example, if you don't give all your content just away like this, but you have white papers and you say, if you want to download this extensive knowledge, 15 pages about something, please leave your email address. Or if you think people might be further down the funnel, then they leave more than an email address, phone number, and so on. Whatever sales need to be able to contact them. Newsletter sign up, I think, is a no-brainer. You obviously get the email address. But what's also very interesting is events or webinars. So you can de-anonymize traffic by having people sign up. And if you sign up to an event where you're going to show up as a person, then you're also very likely to leave more personal information. And then sales can use that to act. What we can also do from marketing for sales is ABM. So who knows what ABM is? Okay. ABM stands for account-based marketing, and basically means that we're not pushing advertising out to the masses out there, but to certain companies that we actually want to target. So you basically upload lead lists and you say, okay, we want to address the Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and so on of this world, and then your marketing only goes to these accounts. And what we like to do is focus it on pain points. So basically what you do is you sit together with sales, you try to understand what are your tier 1 accounts that you want to win. Because chances are, before we call them, it would be good if they see us around the internet. So subconsciously, when we call them, they say, oh, this is a player I've come across. I know them from somewhere, right? So if we basically are present in their everyday life and then call, chances are higher that they know who we are, or that at least they pick up the phone. So how do we do this? Usually we focus this on pain points. So we sit with sales and we try to understand what pain points do potential customers have and how do we map them to our solution. So what are the problems that we can actually solve for people? And then we like to do, for example, videos and push them on LinkedIn to exactly these accounts that sales wants to call. Why videos? First of all, I think they're just more attention grabbing, obviously. If you scroll through the newsfeed on LinkedIn, then there's so much happening and a video just gets your attention. But there's also a little trick behind it, because you can do this on a CPC basis. So you only pay when somebody clicks on it. So you have the positive side effect of basically 2 things. One, when somebody clicks, you can be sure that they're pre-qualified. They've seen what your company is about, and when they click, to some extent you know that they're really interested. Otherwise they wouldn't. And also for the ones that are not interested, you have a nice side effect, which is some awareness of your company, right? And it's for free. You only pay when people click. And in order to do ABM, there's lots of interesting targeting options you can use. I mentioned LinkedIn, where you can go on profiles, so you can say, at Pepsi or Coca-Cola, we know that this or that job title is making the decision to buy our tool, or this or that seniority level at the company is interesting for us. So you can do that on LinkedIn. Since 2 weeks, I think you can also do it on Xing. They were a bit slow to adopt this, but now it's possible there as well. And you can do retargeting, cookie-based. I think that's a no-brainer to most of us. And then you can do what I mentioned earlier, IP range targeting as well. So if you know that these people or these IP ranges have been on your website, you can use that for targeting as well. And the last thing is applying CRM logics. So if we come from a B2C world, we know very well how CRM works. They basically set up email sequences or push notification sequences. So they're always thinking cadences. And why not apply this to the sales CRM? So why not have your marketing CRM guy or girl help the sales guys using the sales CRM? For example, you have a sales rep calling a potential lead 2 times, and before they give up on this lead, why not have them trigger an email flow in their HubSpot or their Salesforce or whatever they're using, right? So why not make them trigger the CRM logic that usually the user in a B2C context would trigger themselves? Yeah, and then tooling, I mean, most of the CRM systems out there move into this direction. We've tried this with Hubsell, which works very well. So I think in the end, it's not so much about tooling, it's just thinking about how can we as a CRM person, usually communicating with customers directly and having responses to customer interactions, why not have that triggered by sales?
All right, after sales. So we talk about sales and marketing a lot, but actually there's a lot of stuff you can do in your after sales department. So it could be customer success, it could be account management, whatever you call it. And those are just a few ideas of what an account manager can actually do to support acquisition. First one is all that content we are talking about. The best converting content is basically generated together with existing clients. So it's probably your account managers who constantly talk to them, who know who are the right guys, who can we actually ask to do something together, and they should really have this on their radar to do it. One example, we did a case study like that with Azovo. So we implemented, Azovo is a software as a service solution for corporate fleet management, so managing large numbers of cars. We basically created a small booklet, 11 pages, very focused on the number 1 KPI that we basically wanted to improve, and this is utilization of the cars that you have. And then we took that and we distributed it on free channels only. So in our newsletter, on social media like LinkedIn and Xing, and we also had an exit intent pop up on our website, showed it there. And we actually managed to generate 120 leads in the first 4 months with this. And 120 leads for B2B companies is actually quite a big deal, because you would usually spend probably 200-300 euros per lead in that industry. So really, really cheap and efficient way to generate leads. And this came basically in existence through a very good relationship in our account management. Next thing, actually not helping marketing but sales, is convincing those happy customers to work as references. Because one of the best things you can actually use in a sales conversation is saying, okay, I've been telling you how great our product is. Why don't you talk to a customer who uses this? And they will also tell you that's really a good product. So that's actually a really, really helpful tool, can really increase your conversions by quite a bit. And again, it's the account manager who should ask for that. And why I talk about all of this? Who here works in account management, or who knows that in their account management team at your company, there's something like an incentivization to generate leads? One. And that's usually the answer we get with our portfolio companies. It's actually a super obvious, straightforward thing to do. Why don't you incentivize those people that basically speak to the guys who say, wow, we are super happy with your product, great customer service, to simply ask the question, thank you, do you know anybody else who could profit from that solution? Probably the most powerful way to generate leads, but it's hardly ever on the radar. Last point, foster word of mouth. It's probably 2 or 3 ways that you can do that. First one is when you organize events. I'm sure a lot of you in B2B marketing do that. Make sure there's a healthy mix of existing and new customers so they talk to each other. You can even ask existing customers to maybe do a presentation together with you on the implementation of the success of your product or something like that. Or you can simply go out and talk to those people. Many of you probably do something like an NPS survey, and we're all very happy to report the number, but few actually go into granularly and look who of those customers actually gave me a 9 or a 10. They're the ones that are super happy about your product. Go out, speak to them individually, and ask if they don't want to share their great experience with your product.
Last point, data. And I'm still surprised to be talking to some B2B companies that don't have a data person in their team. And I can't understand why. Because here is what BI and data can do for marketing and sales. And I think actually if you want to do all of this, what we just shared, you need a data person to help you. First thing, proper tracking. Sounds very boring, I know. The marketers in the room know what UTM parameters are. So basically, you use it to track your marketing campaigns and to be able to afterwards assess which campaign with which partner in which channel worked well. And this is something you also need to do in a B2B context, obviously. And you also need to build this as a small tool that even sales can use. So it can be a very technical thing, but you can also make a nice tool that basically salespeople can click together and then they generate a URL that they can use in every customer interaction in written form. So you can track the sales performance via UTM parameters. And yes, sales will not use it unless you tie it to the bonus. Second thing is what Christoph mentioned already. You want, in a sales department, you want to be able to understand what kind of content has the lead seen before. So these UTM parameters or the Google Click ID, you have to hand it over to the CRM, because only then will the salesperson in the CRM be able to see, oh, this person actually downloaded a white paper on this topic, or this person came via this channel. And only if we do so are we able to calculate fully loaded customer acquisition costs, right? And that's only last click. So the ones who know me know that now the attribution topic will come. Because I think in B2B, there are even stronger arguments for attribution. So who knows what attribution is? Oh, great, okay. Then I won't make it too long then. Basically, if you do online marketing activities to support your sales, and if you have a product that has long sales cycles, chances are you also have multiple online marketing touch points, which result in longer customer journeys, right? So if you have long customer journeys, you need to attribute, otherwise you're doing everything on a last click basis. And what's B2B specific is that chances are you're in touch digitally with different people from the same company, right? And that becomes a problem very quickly. Let me show you what I mean. So let's assume we're selling this HR software that Christoph mentioned. Then people might come across our display ads, they click, then they get a cold call from sales, and then we retarget them because they've been on our website, and finally they convert to an MQL. Great. If we look at it on a last click basis, so we look at the UTM parameters of the last touch point, 100% goes to retargeting. Great, let's scale retargeting, even if that's not possible. If we have some form of attribution, let's take a linear model here, because you don't have to overcomplicate it, then you already can see that the benefit of this conversion is being split among the 3 touch points. But now, and that's usually B2B specific, you have a second person in this team, which is the head of HR. Now the other person goes to the head of HR and says, hey, I found this really cool HR software. Now this person goes to Google, looks it up, clicks on SEA once, reads everything about it, comes back later, converts to an MQL. Great, 2 leads, right? No, it's actually 1 lead. And if you attribute it properly, and you put all these touch points that you can track into 1 journey, then you see that it's 1 lead, and you can properly assess the performance of each channel. And it sounds complicated, maybe, to those who are not familiar with attribution, but it's actually not. And there are companies out there that do this for you, but you have to do it. Because it's very simple. If you don't, then you can't attribute, right? So if you want to understand how much did it cost to acquire a certain account, a certain company, then you have to do attribution on company level. It's as simple as that. So a good tool to use is Dream Data, but you can also ask your BI guys and they'll build it for you. Last thing from my side, single source of truth. Yeah, this is also a very long discussion. We only have 1 data person in the room, unfortunately. But I think you can all relate to this. So usually, marketing people like to look into Google Analytics, like to use HubSpot, and salespeople usually like to use their CRM, oftentimes it's Salesforce. And surprise, most of the time the data doesn't match. There are solutions to this. I mean, yes, it's painful, but you have to invest into integrating your tool landscape. Otherwise, there will be ongoing discussions in every single meeting where marketing and sales are sitting together, because you just have different number of leads in your different systems. And it's a solved problem, right? It's something that you can easily solve if you work with the right people. So just get your data person on board. They will build a 2-way synchronization, or they will use Segment for it, and you're done. We've picked 4 examples now. And we're happy to answer questions afterwards. But the main message we want to bring across is this one. So no matter all the buzzwords out there, there is no secret sauce. There just simply isn't. It's also usually not really a strategic challenge. It's really more something on the operational level. So as Christoph showed, you have to go very granular. You have to talk about everything, and it's only being solved on that level. And that's also what Project A is there for, right? We call ourselves the operational VC because we can help with this kind of stuff. So happy to talk to you.